Hello, everybody. So it's been a while since we worked on this one, and I'm totally ready to do a video on this one. My life is starting to stabilize a little bit. Medication can be really nice. So I feel a little bit more like myself, and let's do another chapter. And right away, it's stability, spotting mental health problems that can put your future at risk, the most common mental health problems among women, and the early warning signs of personality disorders. That's just great. This should be interesting. I want you to enter the dating arena armed with some basic clinical knowledge so you can make an informed decision about whether you want to incorporate her difficulties into your life. Yeah, that's actually really good. At some point later in the book, he says, look, you can't diagnose a person with, just a few quick notes on how to recognize a personality disorder. You can't diagnose a person just based off of a hint or a suspicion that she might have a personality disorder. It's very easy, if you don't know much about psychology, to just throw out those labels. Another wonderful example is kids on TikTok who have this list of diagnoses that they say, I have ADHD and bipolar and schizophrenia and a bunch of other things that actually clash. You shouldn't technically have these two things together. One of two things is happening in those circumstances. Number one, the kid is reading about these disorders and thinking, oh, I must have this too, because a lot of people do that or can do that. Or number two, when you have a mental illness and you're seeing multiple therapists over the course of your treatment, different therapists are going to give you different diagnoses. And so you can end up with a list of different diagnoses from different therapists. And I mean, the thing is, you have to kind of be realistic about this. And if you know anything about mental health care, you know this. But if you don't, then you don't know. Different therapists are going to tell you have different disorders. Some of those labels are accurate and some of those labels are not. So, for example, when I went to therapists in the past, they told me, well, you just have depression. When I was first getting care for this issue that I've been having, it's postpartum depression. And then I saw this therapist and she was like, it's definitely bipolar disorder. Both of those things were wrong. It wasn't postpartum depression and it wasn't bipolar disorder. It was something else. But, if I was to just keep adding those labels onto me and tacking them on one after the other, dude, I'd have a pretty decently long list. Oh, I have all of these things. No, you probably have one, maybe two of these things, and you have a lot of different therapists who have a lot of different opinions. Some of them are just wrong. But it is very important to have an idea of what personality disorders can look like, and he goes more in depth in that in a very, very beautiful way that I definitely appreciate. So, yeah. He talks briefly about how men and women differ in their way of handling depression and anxiety. I don't want to read a quote because I can't find any specific quote. It's more of just an overall section. It's a really good section because men and women react differently to depression and anxiety. There's a stereotype of depression. There's a kind of a textbook idea of what depression is. Women tend to have that experience. Men, when they're depressed, they tend to be irritable. They tend to experience slightly different symptoms of depression. One study that looked at the effect of wives' depression on marriage found greater marital distress, more destructive conflict resolution tactics, and fewer constructive tactics among depressed women. The women in these marriages were more likely to have been previously divorced, more likely to express regret about marrying their current husbands, and they were less affectionate toward their husbands. When you are severely depressed, it's harder to be affectionate with your spouse. If you're a woman, I don't know about with men so much, but if you're a woman, it's hard to be affectionate with your spouse. It's much easier to feel like maybe you shouldn't have gotten married in the first place. It's very easy to it's very easy to fall into some of those patterns where you're just not as committed to the other person. You're so lost in your own misery that you're just not doing a very good job of being a partner. experienced it firsthand. I can totally vouch for this. He is 100% correct. And it's scary because it's bad for relationships, but at the same time, it's also very, very comforting to read this, for me at least, because I know that I'm not alone. I know that other people are in this boat, and I know that it's not just my marriage that struggles with this. So it's like, okay, there's nothing wrong with your marriage. You're just struggling with mental health issues right now. Very reassuring. I actually took this quote and read it to my husband just for that reason. Very reassuring. Still shitty to go through, but reassuring that when you do go through it, it's not the marriage, it's the mental health issues. It's important for men to know that they cannot fix their partner's depression. So what can they do? Be kind, be direct about the problem, don't take depression personally, and help her find treatment. The rest is up to her. It's her responsibility to do the work of recovery. Yes. Abso-fucking-lutely yes. Do not get into a relationship with anyone who seems to think that it's your job to fix them. I go back to my alcoholic coworker who's like, if only I could find a girl who loved me for who I am, then I'd be able to kick the alcohol and all my problems would be solved. No. No. It does not ever work like that. If you get together with somebody and they're mentally ill, most of the time, they're gonna stay just as mentally ill as they were when you met them. They might get worse. If they're mentally ill and they've been working on it for a long time and they're in the process of recovery, so for example, if you meet someone who's, perfect example, in AA, they've been in AA for a year, they still consider themselves an alcoholic, but they're really, really working on it. They're working on developing healthy coping strategies. He talks about this. These people can be really wise, insightful, experienced people. But they're aware of the mental illness. They're aware of their own weaknesses and flaws, and they're actively working to fix themselves. They're not coming to you and say, hey, fix me because I'm broken. Because that doesn't work. That really never works. So, don't feel responsible for other people and their sickness. It is the job of the individual who is ill to try to fix themselves. And yes, I apply that to my own marriage. I'm a little fucked up. I'm fixing it. It's my job. It's not my husband's job. It's my job. That's how it works. You are not obligated to remain with someone who is unwilling to confront her own struggles. This, too, goes hand in hand with the earlier statement. If you are in a relationship with someone and you discover that they have a mental illness, you don't always catch it right away. You start up the relationship, and over time, you notice they start to have like these really unhealthy patterns of behavior. And you call them out on it, like, hey, this is a real problem. I think you should look at this. If they look at it and say, yeah, you're right, and they go seek therapy and they go changing their patterns. So it's not necessarily always therapy. For example, I have ADHD. It's been a problem with my husband and I because I can't keep organized. I've tried several different organizational strategies. They never worked. And then finally I found one that's been working for me. I do it religiously. I have a checklist. Every single day I go through the checklist and I hit the little dots on the checklist one by one. And I make sure that I do those things, because if I don't mark it off on the checklist, I don't know if I did it. I can brush my teeth in the morning and 5 minutes later be sitting there. My mouth will still taste like toothpaste and I'll be wondering, did I actually brush my teeth this morning? I can't remember. I cannot remember from 1 minute to the next what I've been doing. I've always been this way. I don't need therapy to fix that. I need coping strategies. I need tools because I'm, squirrely. But I work on my own problems. Like, this is a problem that came up. We got married. Things were pretty good. We started having kids. The workload started increasing. And that's when it became a problem for us. And I am responsible for fixing that problem. And so I work very hard to fix that problem. I give you that example because if you're in a relationship with someone and They don't want to fix their problem. Don't stay with them. They're not going to get better. They're not going to change. They don't want to change. Why are they going to change? What are you waiting to magically change someday? Like, do you honestly expect, well, if I just stay with her for 10 more years, one of these days she's just going to wake up and have this epiphany. Oh, hey, I'm really messed up. I should do something about that. It never works that way. Don't hold your breath. Leave her. Even physicians and psychologists refrain from diagnosing their loved ones. If you find you and your partner are arguing over issues that seem trivial or unrelated to what might be really going on, then it's time to find a skilled clinician to put an accurate label on the problem. This, going back to my stripper coworker whose boyfriend I got into a fight with, who told everyone that I had bipolar disorder. She didn't know jack shit, but she was telling everyone about that. You are not a professional. And even the professionals don't diagnose their loved ones. If there is an issue that is consistently an issue in your relationship, seek professional help, because they'll be able to identify what the problem really is. They'll be able to help you find good coping strategies. They'll be able to help you in your relationship if you get a couples counselor. My husband and I have a couples counselor right now because he had a brain tumor and I went insane. It's good help. Use the help that is available. It helps. What do drugs, alcohol, shopping, sex, gambling, cleaning, working out, and countless other behaviors have in common? Every one of them can be used to avoid painful thoughts and feelings. If you have bad habits and you use those bad habits to avoid your problems don't get solved, and your bad habits end up taking over your life. It makes you a really shitty partner. Now, that's the shorthand version. He talks about it. He explains it. He does a really great job of explaining it. He has some really good examples in this book of just how that works. Worth a read, but also worth considering. If you have somebody who uses alcohol to avoid their problems, the alcohol isn't necessarily the only problem you're going to have. They don't want to face their actual problems. So you've got the alcohol, and then you've got all the problems. If you get into an argument with a person like that, they're going to run to the alcohol. They're not going to face the fact that you got into this argument. They're not going to face the problems that you were arguing about. But they will get drunk. Substance abuse isn't merely correlated with increased divorce risk. It causes divorce. Oh yeah, that too. Because eventually you can't stand being with them. And I've been in a relationship with an alcoholic. Eventually, he was so terrible at being in a relationship that I just completely emotionally detached from him. And I was coming and I was seeing him, but I didn't care about him anymore. And he'd get really, really drunk and threaten to commit suicide, and it would be like, whatever, man. I don't care. I don't have it in me to care. If you died, I'm not sure I'd be able to care. Because you're such a horrible person. And then when I broke up with him, I didn't even break up with him. One day I just stopped talking to him and never heard from him again. Substance abuse does that to a relationship. He was a really awesome guy, but by the time I left him, there wasn't anything left of him. Just the alcohol. The alcoholic version of him, the drunk version of him. All that was left. Substance abuse will destroy your marriage if you get married to somebody who has a substance abuse problem. If they don't fix that, don't marry them. Greenfield also found that women abuse prescription opiates more often than men, and that addiction to those drugs has increased 141% over the last 2 decades. I have known people who have been addicted to prescription drugs, and it's awful. They're awful. And they're awful to be around. They're unpleasant. And they're annoying. And I mean, they're on drugs. They're drugged up. So they're just unpleasant. Oh God, I hated it. I hated being around people like that. Funny thing, I'm on medication right now and I'm like, oh my God, medication is amazing. Medication is wonderful. I take this stuff religiously now. Because I'm coping with a mental health problem right now. I'm trying to get better. I'm taking the medication the way you're supposed to take the medication. I'm taking like a very, very low dose of the medication. I don't want to increase that dose at all. Some of these drugs are useful, but a lot of them are really easy to abuse, and a lot of people abuse them. And number one, when you start taking a medication, be aware of whether or not it has the potential for addiction. Like, is it habit forming? Be aware of that. But also, like, for example, I know someone who has ADHD. He jokes that it's basically meth that he takes that helps him regulate his ADHD. It helps him because he has ADHD. You might not believe in ADHD. A lot of people tell me, oh, ADHD isn't a real thing. It helps this guy to function. So at that point, does it really matter if it's ADHD or not? He has trouble functioning on a basic level, on a day-to-day basis. He has trouble functioning. He takes his ADHD medication and suddenly he can function much better. Does it really matter if you believe in ADHD or not? He functions. He is able to keep his shit together. Is there a potential for abuse? Yep, there is. Does he use his medication responsibly? Yes, this particular person does. But I hate, like, I've known so many women who abuse prescription medications, and it's just like, they're horrible people. Just be aware of it. They're horrible people to be around. I'm no moral scold. I have nothing against pot. Like alcohol, occasional use is mostly harmless, and unlike alcohol, pot has some legitimate medical applications. I have a friend who very recently was talking with his wife, and it was funny because he had chronic pain issues, and he had them for the entire time they had been married. And before he got together with her, he used pot to kind of fix them. It helped with the chronic pain issues this guy was dealing with. But he got together with his wife, and he didn't smoke pot because he thought she wouldn't approve. And very recently they had this really hilarious conversation where she was like, dude, why don't you just smoke some pot? And he was like, I thought you wouldn't approve. And she's like, why would you think that? So I guess, I mean, I don't know, but I kind of think that they're probably getting a hold of some pot now. These problems can transform otherwise wonderful people into top-tier liars and manipulators against their will. Like my ex-boyfriend that I just talked about, wonderful guy. There was nothing left of him by the time I left him. Like, all the things about him that made him wonderful, they were gone. And there wasn't any point in sitting around waiting for them to come back, because they weren't going to come back, because he was an alcoholic. There's really only one path to recovery: complete honesty about the problem and full willingness to participate in treatment. I told my alcoholic coworker this. I don't know where I first learned this or what first clued me in on this. My father's a clinical psychologist, so at some point he might have told me this. I actually went to an AA meeting to help my alcoholic boyfriend, and they pretty much told me this too. It's just something that you pick up along the way, maybe, but yeah. If you can't be 100% honest about your problem and 100% committed to getting your problem fixed, your problem is not going to get any better. Refusal to get treatment is grounds for leaving. Please read that last sentence twice, if you don't mind. Yeah, if they're not going to get treatment, if they're not going to get better, don't stay with them. Don't expect them to get better on their own. Don't expect them to have this glorious epiphany where one day they wake up and say, you know what, darling? Thank you for staying with me all this time, because I just had this moment when I realized that I've been fucking everything up. They're probably not going to have that moment, and no matter how awesome and lovable they are, if it's an addiction, just know that awesome, lovable side of them is going to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer unless they commit themselves wholeheartedly to kicking that addiction. Otherwise, the addiction will just swallow them up and there won't be anything left. Unresolved emotional injury. Hi, I have PTSD. I don't know if I actually have PTSD anymore. I know that when I got out of high school, I totally had PTSD. And I'm not doing one of those self-diagnosis thing. Like, if you want to know what I was like when I got out of high school, just look up the symptom list for PTSD. That was me. Pretty much, in a nutshell. I was a fucking mess. I could not function on a basic level. I couldn't maintain relationships. I couldn't function. I was a mess. I got out of high school and I was shell shocked. And I worked very, very hard to resolve those issues. I fixed a lot of my PTSD by going to a strip club and working as an exotic dancer. Dance in and of itself, like, I finally got around to reading this one, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. People have been telling me for ages that I need to read this one, and I'm reading it, and I'm taking some notes. I'm not terribly surprised by anything he has in there, but it's interesting reading. One of the things he talks about is reconnecting with your body after trauma. For me, working as an exotic dancer, reconnecting with my body was huge. The reason I'm telling you all this is because he talks about people putting in the work to recover. That's important. Yes, I had PTSD when I got out of high school. I put in the work to fix myself, and by the time I met my husband, I was, relatively emotionally stable. Because I worked my ass off to get better. Because I was non-functional. I couldn't live the way I was. And I knew it. Just like your mind, hers can actually end up recreating old injuries if she hasn't done the work of understanding and overcoming. That's the backward power of core beliefs. You, an innocent bystander, can get caught up in this process. If you remember in earlier chapters, he talks about core beliefs. That doesn't just happen with you. It happens with other people around you. Other people have their own internal prejudices that keep them out of trouble, but also sometimes get them into trouble. Good to be aware of that. If you're with someone and she has some history of trauma, some history of abuse, some history of neglect, some history of just anything unpleasant, it's good to be aware of that. Has she put in the work to get better? Is she aware that she has problems? Has she done anything to fix those problems? If she has, great. You're probably going to have a healthy relationship. If she hasn't, that's a real big red flag there. That is a red flag. Has she put in the work to heal herself of her injuries? The first section of the book, you put in the effort to heal yourself of your injuries. Later on, you have to make sure that she's put in the effort to heal herself as well. Tread lightly if there's a whiff of painful history and broken relationships about her. If she's done the work of overcoming that history, she's going to be that much more insightful as a partner. If not, there's a chance you could be cast in the role of bad guy. I need to just start reading the quotes instead of adding my own 2 cents because he says it so much better than I do. The APA currently recognizes 10 personality disorders as well as personality disorders due to medical conditions and a catch-all other category. Rather than covering them all, I think it's more useful to understand the basic characteristics of disordered personality styles. And he then goes on to give you some broad categories of really unhealthy patterns of behavior, patterns of emotions, patterns of things that you can look for and say, hey, that's not right. You can't diagnose a personality disorder as a layperson. It's good to have just a few basic guidelines on what is unhealthy. So if you see something that's unhealthy, you can kind of look at it and say, hey, that's not healthy. I should be kind of cautious about that. Maybe I should look into that. Maybe I should pay attention to that. That's a potential problem for me down the road. Good to know. I like that he did that. I like that he put it into these kind of broad categories. Pay attention to these things that indicate the possibility of a personality disorder. It could just be that the person is just really flamboyantly emotional or something, and they're okay and they're stable, but it could be a problem. So pay attention. I'd caution you against being fast and loose with suspicions of a personality disorder when a wife or girlfriend is difficult to get along with. Proper diagnosis requires an objective and experienced eye. That said, there's power in knowing what to watch for because it's so easy to be lured in. Once again, he said it better than I could have, but there you go. Depression and anxiety, substance abuse, emotional injury, and personality disorders can kill relationships. Yet none of them automatically preclude close relationships. It's not what she's struggling with, it's her willingness to manage it that counts. Very important to be noted. One of the sanest people that I have ever met has bipolar disorder. Very stable person in a committed long-term relationship. I don't know how committed. Pretty darn committed. Long-term relationship. Very stable individual. I have great respect for this person. It's not what's wrong with the person you're trying to date. Everybody has flaws. Everybody has flaws. It's whether or not they're willing to put the work in. Life is shitty. Sometimes people become mentally ill. I was mentally pretty stable when I met my husband. I know a lot of those one-shot commenters who are like, "You're a fucking whore," because they always come by and, they have to spill their 2 cents. Those guys are sure that I was not mentally stable when I met my husband. I was pretty mentally stable when I met my husband. He got a brain tumor, and I went insane. The short version of it. I'm now trying to recover from that mental illness. I have been consistently trying to recover from that mental illness for 2.5 fucking years. I've been working my ass off trying to recover from that mental illness. I've been trying everything that I can think of trying to recover from that mental illness. In fact, pretty much the only thing that I've cared about for the last 2.5 years, how the fuck do I get out of this mental illness? That's why I'm like, oh, hallelujah, thank God for meds. Anything that gives me just a little bit of a foothold against my mental illness is a fucking godsend, because I have been working my ass off trying to get better. Because I don't want to be like this for the rest of my life. I wasn't like this when I met my husband. I wasn't like this for most of our marriage. Just the last 2.5 years. Sometimes shit happens. The important thing is your partner willing to put in the work to get better? That's the important thing. It doesn't matter if she's an alcoholic. If she's in AA and she's committed to AA and she's managing her shit, then she could be a really good partner for you. Maybe she was an alcoholic at one point in her life. Doesn't matter if she's put in the work and she is continuing to put in the work. Everybody has flaws. It's what you do about them that matters. Let's see. He's talking about recovery and saying, there's no shame in acknowledging that you don't have the time or the desire for the task. Just know this. The woman who is unwilling to strive for her best state of mental health is unlikely to succeed in relationships. That's important too. It is not your fault if you look at somebody who's got a mental health problem that they're really struggling with, and maybe they've only just realized they have it, or maybe they've had it for a while and they're just not willing to put in the effort. I mean, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time and your energy. It is not your job to come into someone else's life and fix it. It's their job to fix it, just like it's your job to fix you. I have limited tolerance for incels who are like, somebody just needs to come into my life and love me for me, and then everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows and puppy dogs. It doesn't work like that. You need to fix you, but they need to fix them. Every individual is responsible for fixing themselves. And honestly, they're only responsible for fixing themselves. Now, if you get together with someone and they are fixing themselves and they're doing a great job of it, but they're struggling or they have a relapse or they're not always 100% on it, like me with my ADHD, I'd love to keep on top of the dishes, but it doesn't always happen the way I was hoping it would. Sorry. That doesn't mean you just leave them. Like, you try to be supportive, but understand that if you get to a point where you just can't deal with their shit and they can't keep on top of their shit, there's nothing wrong with saying goodbye. There's no shame in it. It's healthy. Do not force yourself to put up with someone else's addiction or someone else's personality disorder or someone else's mental illness. Do not force yourself to put up with that because you feel some sense of duty or obligation. Take care of yourself. If they can't manage themselves, then that's not on you. And that's the end of this chapter. Hopefully I haven't talked too much about me. And I will talk to you guys later.